Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rally Day Partners, and this is the Founder's Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. All right, we're going to get going. Nice to meet you, Edward and Robert.
Hi, Ryan.
How are you guys?
Good.
Great.
Welcome to this edition of the Founder's Journey podcast brought to you by Rally Day Partners. Joining us today are two really special gentlemen, Robert Wolfe and Edward Norton. You may have heard of Robert, the more famous of the two of them. Robert started a business called Moose Jaw, which was actually ultimately sold to Walmart, but they were kind of on the forefront of outdoor product sales, initially bricks and mortar, and then eventually over the internet, and competed so mightily that, was it Walmart, Robert, or was it Dick's Sporting Goods, or were they one and the same?
No, we were first initially purchased by Walmart, and then last year Dick's purchased Moose Jaw from Walmart.
Okay, got it. And we'll get back to that a bit. For those of you who are unaware, Edward Norton, quote unquote, the actor, is a very active investor. He comes from a family that was also very active in the business community, both internationally, philanthropically, went to Yale, smart guy, and has started a number of businesses, one called Kinshaw, one EDO, with a fellow by the name of Daniel Nadler. Robert and Edward met as they were building a crowdfunding site, and they're going to talk a bit about that experience because it was formative to their new work together, new collaboration together on a company called Zeck. Zeck is a company that is reimagining, redesigning, rebuilding, and maybe just building for the first time what a great board meeting can be. As we all know who are in the private equity industry, board meetings are just terrible. And these two are on a mission today to change the behaviors and the way in which board meetings are conducted. It's incredibly relevant to Rally Day. For those of you who are part of our community, you know that we are rebels with a cause at Rally Day. We've tried to turn our industry upside down through different incentives, different competencies, certainly different experiences that we want to give our leadership teams and their employees. But to pull that off, we need co-conspirators. We need people to build our platform with us so that we can deliver on our promise of making private equity not suck. And we wanted to change board meetings very badly. All three of my partners founded companies, sold them to private equity firms, and lived through the PTSD of board meetings that were soul-sucking and otherwise a liability to our companies and not an asset. And it wasn't until we met Robert and Edward that we realized that our intent was right on the money, but we needed Robert and Edward to deliver on the technology and the actual platform for us to be able to deliver the experience that we dreamt of. So first, I would like to thank both of you for having the courage and conviction to set out on what is probably at times feels like an evangelical journey. We can't deliver our dream unless you guys fulfill yours. And we're just incredibly grateful for both of you and for your company.
Thank you. I mean, you all have been amazing partners.
Thanks so much.
I also asked Robert if I could give Edward some grief. He said yes. Edward was late to our podcast, and Robert has a hard stop here in a bit. So I wasn't going to bring up anything about your Hollywood life, Edward, but now that I'm going to have 5 minutes solo with you, I am going to torture the heck out of you at the end. But I'd like to kind of start with, you guys have an awesome formation story that begins, I think, in the New York Marathon. So whichever one of you wants to tell the story of how Zeck started, and maybe you're going to finish each other's sentences, but our listeners love to hear about how great, different, cool companies start, and always surprised at the serendipity and sort of the randomness of it. And in your case, the humor of it. So one of you start, and let's get that rolling.
Well, let's see. It all started with a summer camp in Canada called Tamaqua. No. So my girlfriend at the time, now wife, Shauna, knew Robert and Jeffrey through summer camp, mutual friends and family at summer camp. And Robert and Jeffrey were wrapping up their Moose Jaw adventure. And I have been involved in, I've been involved in East African conservation work, working with Maasai communities on conservation and sustainable development work for a long time. I won't even get into all that, but we had come up with this idea. We had come up with an idea, which was to field a team of Maasai runners with U.S. conservation supporters and field a team in the New York Marathon to try to raise money for our org, as so many good nonprofits and charities do with these race events. And this was in 2009. And we went around looking at the fundraising software at the time, and it was very poor. The user interface was really, 90s technology, and it didn't incorporate the ability to leverage social media or interconnect with any of the modern forms of crowd connectivity. And I got talking to Shauna about it, and she said, who's really, really good at building community relationships is my friends Robert and Jeffrey, who built Moose Jaw. And I said, oh yeah, that is so true. They have the greatest customer EQ. And so we all got introduced. And I said, we have a problem, which is we want to do something and the tool set's just not there. And Robert and Jeffrey said, well, let's just build it. If we don't have what we want, let's just build it. And so we built a micro fundraising site, not branded. We just built our own micro fundraising platform. We built a bespoke platform for our team in the New York Marathon. We called it the Maasai Marathon, and we engaged a lot of fun early social media leveraging things and team building. And lo and behold, our team of 30 runners raised more than the American Cancer Society that year with 300 runners. And we just got besieged by nonprofit organizations calling us and saying that was a showcase of how to do great, fun, activated social fundraising. Can we pick your all's brains? Can our development teams talk to you guys? Can we do these things? And I remember Robert basically permanently injured himself running on the marathon team. And he's still limping to this day, 15 years later. And he basically said, you've injured me for life, and so I think you owe me. And he said, I think we should actually build this into, I don't know if a company, or I don't know if it's a software company or if it's like Kickstarter, it's a social fundraising site for charity. But Jeffrey and I have this whole idea, and we should all do this together. But in good founder moments, we were sitting in our living room in New York, and they said, we have a great name for it. And they put it up, and I'm going to spell it. It was ANEWERA. And Shauna and I both went, Anawera? Is this like an Indian, Native American kind of a thing? Anawera, is that like the tribe, or is that whatever? And they both went, no, it's a new era. And we were like, that's awful. That's just awful. That's like Radiohead calling themselves On a Friday as a band until right before they became Radiohead. We were like, that's the worst band name ever, Anawera. And we had so our first argument as founders was, what was this going to be called? And I think I don't actually remember where CrowdRise came from, but CrowdRise clearly spoke to like what we were trying to do. We were trying to get people to assemble easily around good causes together, and CrowdRise grew up and out of our own experience of not having the tool that we needed, and then thinking we could transpose that into something that could be used by other people. And it was a great adventure. The four of us built and ran CrowdRise through to when it became a part of GoFundMe. We merged it with GoFundMe, and then we all worked at GoFundMe together for a number of years. And we had so much fun that we wanted to do something else, and we weren't sure what we wanted to do until we kind of started. We had a similar experience, which is we were on vacation, and Robert left a tequila drinking session around a fire pit in Spain to go join a board meeting and in the States. And he came back and he said that I think that was the single worst experience of a board meeting that I have ever had. I'm pretty sure that when it ended, the CEO went and started punching himself in the face, like that scene in Fight Club where you beat yourself. He said that's how bad it was. And it led to us around a fire kind of talking about why, joking aside, why do board meetings suck so bad? Why is this kind of ubiquitous experience? Why is this thing that all organizations, corporate and nonprofit, have to endure? Why do we all endure something that sucks so bad? And why has nobody worked on this? And we realized that, not unlike the CrowdRise experience, we thought that a significant part of the problem was that the tools available just didn't do what we want them to do or need them to do to try to promote a positive experience. And we started thinking about it and we started talking about it. And Zeck grew up and out of those conversations. And I think the thing that I take away from our experiences together, having done this twice all together, is that number one, you really, partners is great. Like everything is better done with other people. I can't even imagine founding and running a company by myself. I think it would be horrible, like the worst experience I can imagine. And I think partners makes everything better if they're partners that you can laugh with and, have fun together on a mission. And the second thing is that I think the best enterprises grow up and out of an authentic experience that you have yourself of a lack or a pain point or something you wish in your own life you wish you had, and you go to fix it for yourself and then realize that it actually might be something that shares that service or genuinely acts as a positive contribution to others to help others fix the same problem that you've fixed for yourself. And that's why we're working together on this.
Well, and as a user and as a converter, I guess, in the last, Robert, we've been working with you guys, I think now for 2 years. You guys have only been around for, is it three or 4 years now?
That's right.
Point?
This is our second full year.
Second.
Yeah.
It's
early adopter. Well, that was because we were
You were
so
very
damn
early.
desperate. You guys
Joking aside, though, how would you describe? You were touched on it, but how would you describe the desperation? Like, because we do hear, it's very interesting. Like, this is an esoteric world. You could say, like, this is the plumbing of organizations. This isn't second. But we find that people actually use fairly emotional language to describe how awful. I mean, you just said desperate. Think about that. You didn't say inconvenient or waste of time. Like, desperate is a pretty emotional word. And we find that that's consistently true. People feel emotionally negative about the board process. But when you say desperate, what do you mean?
Well, I would have to tell a personal story about that to bring it home. But as I mentioned, I was a business founder and I built a company from 11 employees to 450 employees in the multi-site healthcare space. I did so after a successful but miserable private equity career for 15 years. And I was at a place in my life where I wanted to go big and do something that my kids would be proud of, and maybe even my parents, although that's still questionable. I don't know if they know what I do, but I certainly wanted them to be proud of what I did. And so I started a little business and I built it to become a very large business, and I ran out of money. And to do an add-on acquisition that I knew I needed to do, I had to bring in a private equity fund, which was super weird for me, having been in that industry for 15 years. But, it's the only way to really raise meaningful capital at scale. And so I brought in a private equity partner and I had my first board meeting. It was on January the 7th. And, I'll never forget it. It was awful. We weren't prepared enough. We didn't invest enough in the amount of infographics. Part of that was because we had only closed with them on December the 16th. Okay. So we had 3 weeks after closing when my CFO and I were miserably tired and came ill prepared and, just totally screwed it up. I mean, we were just awful. And I think our new investors who had just put, a lot of dough into our business probably left that board meeting with a lot less confidence than when they went into that board meeting. And for us, it was a warning that we better never do that wrong again. So basically, the way I would tell this story is that a week before the board meeting, all of us in the C-suite would start working on our slides with kind of that anxious feeling that you had maybe when you were cramming for a midterm exam. Some of us were better at getting ahead of it. Some of us were too busy doing our actual work, had the right intention, but just didn't have the time. Others of us just had bad habits, and it was like, I'll just bang these out the night before. But it felt like we were in college and we were really getting ready. And then the day of the board meeting came, and then it was a wondering around, what are they going to ask? And we would sometimes even role play with each other, like, oh my God, our gross margin's down by 200 basis points. How are we going to explain this in a way that doesn't freak them out? By the way, during that week, we had all the drama of running a business happening at the same time, and families and lives. But it was like an obsession with showing up in a way that we weren't going to suck. Then you would have the 4-hour board meeting, pitting out, and some of us getting, stomach aches and these kinds of things. And, we'd send them a 75-page deck, and it was very clear they hadn't read a stitch of it, probably because we didn't send it out soon enough in their minds. But at any rate, page by page by inglorious page, we would be tortured for 4 hours. We'd get done with the board meeting. Nothing happened. We probably spent about 30 minutes on voting on this bullshit and that bullshit. And then we would all leave. And it would take us like a few days to emotionally recover from that experience. And so when you add all that up, we basically only had 2 weeks out of, oh, by the way, these were monthly board meetings. Okay.
Oh my God.
So here's a
Oh
trick
my
question.
God.
What's worse than a quarterly board meeting? And so we only had 2 weeks of productivity in any given month. So when we started Rally Day, we really wanted to change that. And we had mastered our intent, but we had not mastered the competency to wholly change the way this was for our companies. And so when we discovered you all, we were desperate because of our own personal experiences and an unfulfilled promise that we took really seriously. And we could change the tonality, but we couldn't change the mechanics. We could say, boy, we want to drive this car to this destination, but we didn't have the right vehicle to get there. And so, and look, you guys have come a long way, but like product 1.0 wasn't awesome. But let me tell you this, it was 1,000 times better than what we were doing. And so we've been on this journey with the two of you and frankly, the rest of your company, who we thank every day, patiently saying, even if this takes the rest of our lives, we're okay with that because the return on this effort and commitment will be worth it, because when we have a good board meeting, it changes lives. It changes our customers' lives, our suppliers' lives, our employees and their families' lives. It's a very powerful lever that we're really proud to be part of. And it's not just a board meeting, guys. It would be like saying it's just the Colosseum, but it was Rome. Like all the great drama stories of Roman society happened in that Colosseum. And for private equity executives, the people who are owned by private equity and venture capital firms, they will tell stories for decades about that one board meeting, like the one Robert had to attend, and about the tequila they drank afterwards. And if we can change the way those meetings happen, we change entire industries and we change a lot of lives at a very personal level. So the word desperation, Edward, comes from just, I think, a lot of PTSD.
Well, I really appreciate that, and despite the gallows humor laughter of, I think you might have just taken the top spot for the most painful board experience set that we've heard yet, because I don't think anybody has capped their story by saying we did this once a month.
Right.
I honestly think I was the punchline. It was like, wow, this is up there with the worst of them. And then you said, and we had board meetings once a month, and I almost fell off my chair. That's the worst thing I've ever heard happen to a company.
I resemble that comment.
But I think that one thing you're getting at that I don't think is hyperbole. We really agree that, people spend a lot of their working life. They spend a lot of their life, the quotient of time in their life, in their working enterprises, and so the quality of the experience that you're having in that frame of your life, it affects you. It affects your whole life. It affects your sense of yourself. It affects the mood you go home into your family. And this whole idea of a board is so strange if you think about it. In theory, it's supposed to be contributive and propulsive and additive and strategic, all these positive words. But so often it has devolved into this negative that you described, which is it feels like a test. It feels like an exam. It feels like, a monitoring review type of a situation, even though you're the boss of the company. And so both the preparation for it, and we always say the number of people who set out to start a business and say, my aspiration is to build a good board deck is precisely zero. Nobody ever said that they wanted to spend their time in life building presentations. So that's already unpleasant. But if the experience of the board meeting that flows from it is culturally negative, then we've got this thing sitting under all of our organizational cultures that's causing negative dividend, causing negative feeling, negative emotional feeling. And that means it's toxifying people's lives. It is actually toxifying moods, professional experience. And like you said, if you can flip that around, you can create more than just a more efficient tool. You can create more positive human interactions that make people feel good about each other, themselves, why they're doing what they're doing, and all of it. So we don't, even though it's kind of esoteric, we actually think that if you take in the fact that there are literally millions of companies with tens of millions of people working in them, and 2.5 million nonprofit orgs in the United States with millions more working in them, that it's that many people who get affected by a negative experience of a board meeting, not only the lead up to it but the doing of it and then the aftermath. And so it's kind of one of those things like, I don't know, that sometimes I think there are things that hover under our social experience that people don't talk about enough, and this feels like one of those things that once you get people sharing about it, you realize a lot of people wish that this was actually something more positive in their lives.
Yeah, well said. And Robert, if you could bring us home with a little bit of, for those of us on this podcast that use the product every day, it's easy for us to kind of wax around why it's different. But would you kind of like in your 5-minute version, tell us why Zeck is different and what you were trying to achieve in the development of the product?
Yeah, I think we're lucky. All of us are lucky in that we're engaging in this based on our own real life experience. So for us, when we would build these presentations at Moosejaw and CrowdRise, the process was literally as follows. Our leadership team would spend 150 hours to put the presentation together. We would then send it to our board in a slide deck or a PDF that they couldn't read on their phone, which is insane, and they couldn't engage with in any way. And then most importantly, we would all get ready for this grandiose board meeting, and we would meet in New York or LA or San Francisco and get into the room and quite literally reread the board a deck that they've already read. So when we were thinking about what can Zeck do to be a catalyst to solve these three problems, one, save the leadership team's time, and not 10% of their time, but 80% of their time. So there are several facets and feature sets that actuate that. Everything from the guardrails to AI. Secondly, Zeck is not a deck. So the idea that we're using PowerPoint or Google Slides that were quite literally built pre-iPhone and not optimized remotely for mobile is just crazy. So Zeck, A, works perfectly on your phone, and it's a workspace. It's not a Zeck. It's not a deck. So you can engage with it. The result of that is that when you get into the live board meeting, no one is going in and rereading anything. There is pre-work done. So you're engaging about the comments that were left prior to the meeting. So it's all banter, it's all engagement, it's all strategic, and dare I say fun. So part of the idea here is that if we can make these meetings less miserable, everyone will look forward to them, and then they'll be more productive. That's what we're trying to solve at Zeck. And I think Edward made this point previously. The feedback isn't normal. It's effusive. People can't believe the transformation, and that's been super encouraging and affirming.
I think, Ryan, we used to have a kind of a first principles idea when we were starting this, which is like there's a qualitative problem, but underneath that is a quantitative problem. So if quantitative is time, right? Everybody's time is precious, and you only have so much time to talk together. So if you spend way too much time getting ready and you waste a lot of time in the experience itself, it's impossible for the qualitative to be good. So our thesis has always been solve the quantitative, make the quantitative problem much more efficient, make it much easier to get ready, shorten that work cycle, and also in the meeting itself, take out of the meeting the quantitative bullshit that you already cited. Why are we voting on minutes approvals in the modern era? Why are we doing employee stock option approvals? We spend an hour. We think companies spend an hour per meeting on governance bullshit that could be done before the meeting in an interactive platform. And we've built the pre-vote authorization tool set to strip that out. If you reduce the amount of quantitative time that's being wasted getting ready and in the meeting itself, what do? You open up all kinds of room for qualitative improvement on the characteristic of the conversation. And mostly, our second core principle is forward-looking, not backward-looking. People don't want to look backwards. It's a bore. And that's what makes people feel like they're getting reviewed. They want to look forward. They want to anticipate, play the forward game. Think about what can we all do together, what's coming. So qualitative improvement can be defined as how do we make these things more forward-looking and less rearward-looking? And I think those are sort of the operating principles under Zeck. The things that make that possible are the setup tools and the iterative, the fact that people can iterate within it just means that you arrive with so much more of the work done. And I think there's one other thing that fuels that I think is worth talking about because it's almost like organizational game theory, which is the relationship between a board and a management team should not be unidirectional responsibility. You should have a sense of reciprocal obligation. A board should feel as obligated to the management as the management feels to the board. And when the management of an organization cannot see how their board interacted with the materials that they sent, then they're just on the hook. They feel blind. And if a board, member can get that 90-page PDF, not read one page of it, show up at the meeting, and then ask a bunch of dumb questions that if they had read it, they would have answered, who's holding them to account? Nobody. So in Zeck, the very fact that the management team has transparency in advance of the meeting into how their board interacted with the deck, and since the board knows that transparency is available, what happens? It promotes reciprocal obligation. It promotes a sense on the board that, hey, if I don't do the effing work and I show up and ask a bunch of dumb questions that were in the charts, everybody's going to know that I'm the weak link, right? So we've had lots of management teams say that just the fact that both sides of the table know that the platform is transparent and interactive and generates actual analytics for the management on where the time is being spent by the board members, or that they could have asked that question within the platform prior to the meeting. They said it's just transforming the EQ when the meeting starts, because everybody knows that they can't, they can't just basically put the management in the hot seat. Everybody has to have done their work. And I think reciprocal obligation is a really important cultural principle when it comes to an organization and its board,
I love that. And I also want to just touch on a couple things that you brought up. One, just kind of a humorous way of looking at the old paradigm. Imagine if, and it's football season right now, imagine if, like, the day before the next game, the coaching staff went through statistically every player's stats as a way of preparing for the next game without any acknowledgement of who the opponent was, without any sort of plan whatsoever. But like, hey, like, this was our last game, Robert. This is how many throws you made. This was how many catches you had or completions. This was how many interceptions you had. Let's talk about that for a little while too, while we're at it. This is how many times you fumbled the ball. Now, let's get on the field and play our next opponent. I mean, that's kind of what is happening in the absence of Zeck. The second thing that's so interesting, Edward, about what you just said is, in my experience, there's a little bit of a, I'm being modest, a little bit of a power dynamic occurring where the board wants to look like they're prepared. The board wants to exert strength to the executive team. And so I had a boss in my first private equity gig who would make a list. He called it his gotcha list. And it was 3 to 5 things that he would have written down on a piece of paper that he could trick the management team and show that he was paying attention, because he said, if they hear me ask these really tough 3 questions that they can't answer, they're going to be scared of that next board meeting and they're going to do better work. And like, I would look at him in the middle of this board meeting and he would wink at me before he would ask this question that he knew nobody was going to be able to answer. And what is so cool about Zeck, to me, one of the things that I love about it is the comments that are getting socialized before the board meeting. And the rule of thumb is like, that's where the gotchas need to be. And management can then come to the board meeting prepared for those gotchas so that we build up their self-esteem and not tear them down. And that has really changed things. I think it also helps, there's always kind of this other board member who's kind of quiet. Sometimes at rally day, it's a younger person who's lower on our org chart and they don't feel necessarily entitled to speak up during a board meeting. Well, in a Zeck, it's a democracy. You put your comments in without regard to your title or your place in the world. And I'll tell you, some of the very best questions come out of the younger people in our organization who are actually closer to the details than I am. And I just think that giving a voice to the underrepresented is as beautiful as taking away the voice from the blowhard or the mischievous one who's trying to manipulate power. And so in that regard, I think, Edward, you're touching on this whole kind of social dynamic fixing an organizational problem, which is just beautiful.
Yeah, we get that feedback a lot where organizations say to us, listen, we had this board member who made our life so miserable, and now he's on equal footing. And at the same time, particularly in the hybrid world where you may have 4 board members who are live and 1 on Zoom, it is almost impossible for the person on Zoom to participate. With Zeck, that goes away because it's built for this hybrid world. And the idea is to make it all collaborative. So again, by the time you get into the room, I think it was Edward, it was either you or someone who you were talking with said, I think it was you said, prior to Zeck, these board meetings, it was like doing homework. And with Zeck, it's like playing chess. And I think that's true because you're flipping this from a pain in the ass where you just feel like you're reporting to something that is, again, everyone looks forward to and is entirely forward thinking. And I think your football analogy was right, and I'm definitely going to use it and probably not give you credit because I think it's entirely true. That the way that people prepare for board meetings without Zeck is entirely different than using a collaborative workspace.
So, Robert, one's kind of a funny question, and I know you're guttable, and one's a real one. Funny question, like all your moose jaw humor, which was kind of legendary at the time. You had these jokes like, this jacket is so comfy, it'll feel like a grizzly bear just gave you a big hug if you survive. And this kind of, it was kind of like smart dad humor, kind of zany, funny stuff. How much time did you take and how much did you love building out the Zeck site with all of your funniness on full display?
I mean, that's, again, our goal is to make these meetings less miserable. And I think there are very few platforms that deal with something as consequential as a board meeting where you have a wedding crashers quote above the fold. And that's our whole team, right? So we're really lucky to have most of the people on our team come from CrowdRise and Moose Jaw. So we're all aligned. And again, we think if we're proselytizing that through the branding, then that'll seep through with the users. And that's definitely happening. Again, the feedback we get, even on our posts on social, are crazy. I mean, people just don't talk that way. But I do think what we're doing is transformative and people are feeling it. I think people are along for the journey and it's really cool.
Samantha, who's one of your fave Rally Day, talks a lot about the power of playfulness. And just in terms of engaging your right brain and your soul as opposed to just your left brain, and just the also like connectivity that playing together creates from a team flow dynamic. So in that regard, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll ask Edward the second question.
All right, I'm going to jump. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for your time. All right, Edward, we've got you all to ourselves now, you poor guy. Something that I've been wanting to suggest that I wanted to get your take on was we've learned about this thing called unconscious commitments, which are basically ways that we're behaving that we have somehow made an unconscious decision to show up behaving as. And once you kind of know what those unconscious commitments are, you can kind of be aware of them, unpack them, and work on showing up differently on behalf of your teammates or your family or friends or whatever. A good one is like someone who is unconsciously committed to sarcasm, and they may not know their full commitment to sarcasm, but it can be kind of divisive and corrosive to relationships. Just an example, but in your Zeck feature set, have you ever considered, a list of board meeting norms that the participants can click that they want to opt into so that they're making a conscious decision to act and behave in a certain way during the board meeting, and whether that nearly tactile saying, I'm going to click these 3 behaviors that I'm going to be consciously committed to in a positive way. For example, I'm going to show up with curiosity as opposed to trying to make a point. I mean, have you guys ever considered trying to infuse sort of meeting norms or standards in a way that kind of sets the table for more consistently positive behaviors during a board meeting, other than the derivative effect of your core product?
Of the derivative effect of transparency, I think on that idea of reciprocal obligation. But I love your idea. We've talked about it. We've talked about that theme. I would say one of the things we've meditated on is the idea that I had one really great boss of an organization who used to say, when I was young and in New York and working for a nonprofit housing organization, and he used to go around the table at board meetings and ask to conclude his board meetings, asking every single board member to state what was their proactive to do commitment before the next board meeting. In other words, he didn't let anybody walk out saying, I reviewed you and I'm going to go report on the security of our investment or our donation or whatever. He just asked everybody to say what's one thing they would do prior to and I love that. I think we've talked about that being a potential opt-in tool that management could ask the board members to declare that in advance of the meeting, or at least that it'll get worked into the each meeting. The board member commitments will be cited and checked in on, almost like company has to report, but the board member has to report on their declared commitment toward an action. But I like your idea a lot, because yours is more actually about sort of the EQ of the mind state that people are going to enter the meeting. The great thing about Zeck as a platform is number one, we see no limit to the optional tools to optimize board meetings that you can incorporate. Like, this crap that's out there that are basically repository platforms. I won't even name them. We all know what they are. They're just these garbage board management platforms. They're not doing anything to try to optimize the quality of the experience. And so I think what you're suggesting is one among many things. Like, I like the idea of a menu of best practices or suggested board relationship optimization methodologies. There's no reason that and many other things can't be in there. And I'll say that I think we've already had a very positive experience with feedback from users like you just gave. We've seen CEOs proactively use Zeck to build financing pitch decks. They love that they can see how people engaged with their financing pitch deck. We've had them build investor updates in it. And by seeing people use it or declaring what they wanted to use it for, we've been able to turn that around pretty quickly into product. So now you can make a Zeck. We have Zeck templates for those other use cases outside of board meetings, and you can keep those in your library of Zecks. Your investor updates, your all hands meetings, your financing pitch decks, and I love the idea of formalizing a menu of best practices around mental dynamics that's there as well. There's no reason at all we couldn't do that.
Well, and it brings up an interesting point from a founder standpoint that a lot of our companies struggle with in our portfolio and outside, which is how you balance product development with revenue so that you don't end up having to raise so much damn money to respond to silly ideas like mine. At Zeck, how have you guys kind of cracked that code so that you're matching new features that are required or requested with and at a pace that your burn rate and your funding can support, so that the company isn't going to Uncle Norton for funding?
I'm laughing because I love the idea that my uncles would be available capital providers for our software company. It's like Salesforce has invested, but you know what? This round, I'm going to my uncles. We're going upstream. But, now you're getting into interesting questions around the challenging dynamics of any company, but I think in particular software companies. How do I want to answer that? I think that, when Robert and Jeffrey and Sean and I ran CrowdRise, and we had I will say we had fantastic venture capital investor experience. We worked with Fred Wilson, the famous venture capitalist at Union Square, which was 3 blocks from my apartment in New York. And we genuinely liked and appreciated Fred as not just an investor, but as a board member and advocate. He was all the best things. And it might have spoiled us a little bit, but we really believed in, maybe to a fault, we really believed in trying to run a business on fundamentals, not assuming that there was more capital at a higher price that we, and I would say that, if you look at the crowdfunding space at that time, it was pretty frothy. There was Kickstarter, doing great. There was us in the more quasi SaaS org supporting platforms, maybe B2B, you could call it. And then there was Indiegogo and there was GoFundMe. And at the time it was peak culture of like raise and burn and grow, profitability TBD. And we were certainly getting a lot of input that we should just take on more money and do it ourselves. We had a more conservative impulse, which was that we felt in our small, narrow world, we felt that there was an inevitable consolidation. And we really liked the idea of consolidating CrowdRise with GoFundMe, maybe much earlier than other people would have advised us. In the end, it proved very, very positive because GoFundMe as a part of CrowdRise became a part of a very profitable and sustainable business, whereas on our own, we might not have. And I think there was humility in that decision that proved very wise. As we've been building Zeck, we've also become aware again that in pure business software companies, there's a little bit of a chimera out there, which is like no sector in the world gets higher sort of investment multiples than software companies that are hitting certain metrics of growth and recurrent revenue and all this stuff. But there's a real trap in it too, which is inevitably the venture capital community wants you to take more money and enter larger and larger scales of burn. If you're old enough and you've lived through few down cycles, you realize that that's great until the music stops and you've been underwritten to a number that if you commit yourself to the like we're always burning version of a company, you better be prepared to be on that ride for a long time. And so we've tried to build Zeck as a very lean and mean operation. And right now, with a great team, we've been able to satisfy, I think, the natural flow of customer input and build out into product while still trying to keep the margins close to a real business, if that makes any sense. It's always a trade-off because you want to grow and you have to invest in growth, but I'd call us conservative because of how many, everybody focuses on the ones that get through, but there are an awful lot of companies, especially in 2024, that are facing down rounds, that are on fumes, that are actually good companies, but they got underwritten to frothy numbers that now, and those, we don't want to be in that kind of a scenario. So we're trying to be steady and grow it organically and not, get out over our skis too much, if that makes sense.
It does. I was a competitive skier, so it makes a lot of sense. So switching gears, the final topic, and then I promise we'll stop torturing you. But as I've gotten later in my life, I've been studying creativity more. My favorite quote is "Eternity is in love with the creations of time." It's the beautiful expression of how our creations today can be so beloved for perpetuity. I think William Blake was the one who wrote that some time ago. But then I kind of got on a reader's list, starting with Stephen Pressfield. He wrote that book, War of Art, really good book about kind of the challenge of creativity. And I think a lot of us who aren't from the arts, like you have been, think of creativity being kind of a flash in your head or a moment of brilliance or whatever. And I think Stephen Pressfield really helped me understand the rigor, the discipline, and kind of the grit that is required of artists like yourself. I can only imagine how hard it was to build a career in the acting world. How would you compare the process or the challenges of creativity as an artist versus creativity as now you playing the part of business builder? How has that changed you?
It's a very astute question. And in truth, I think that people sometimes create sort of this thing about right brain, left brain. I sometimes find to be a little bit of I'm not sure I agree with that dichotomy or that idea of the schism between the analytic brain and the creative brain. I know we have hemispheric brains and I know they contribute different things, but to me, the two things you're calling, sort of one being, people sometimes ascribe to the arts a sort of a definition of pure creativity, right? Somehow that's pure. And that creativity in business or business enterprises is somehow, I don't know, polluted by the business motive or the profit motive or whatever. And I don't actually, I'm not sure I agree with even that bifurcation, because number one, the very best creative artists, the ones with the deepest patina and reputation as protean creators, bringing like authentic zeitgeist or voice or whatever, I can 100% assure you are craftspeople. They are conscious craftspeople who, no matter whether it's Bob Dylan or David Bowie or Bruce Springsteen or Robert De Niro or Meryl Streep or anyone you want to point to as like an almost iconic kind of a creative figure in any sphere. And I'm just naming ones who meant a lot to me. You could say the same about Chance the Rapper or, anybody in any sphere that people have projected a lot of, let's just call it zeitgeist energy onto, or sense that those people are expressing or articulating something that we all feel connected to. Those people have crafted that work. They have imagined, they are real people who have a personality that you may or may not know the full complexity of, but they've crafted a narrative. They've crafted the work. They've done it with consciousness. They know what they're tapping into. They know what their reference points are. They are analytic about it, even though they may also be passionate about it and have emotion that's plugging into it. No less or no more than I think people who sit down with a blank whiteboard with friends and say, let's start, taxis are bullshit. Let's start a new thing called a ride hail company. You know what I mean? Like, everything's a blank page, whether it's a song you're going to write or a movie script you're going to write or a painting you're going to do, or whether it's a whiteboard with a bunch of people sitting around and trying to think up an idea about a company. It's still a story. It actually is a story. You're coming up with a narrative that you're creating from scratch, and you have to do the same thing, which is get other people to buy into it, to feel that it speaks to them. And pure art might be speaking to emotional and psychological existential experiences, and companies might be speaking, like we're talking about, to it might be saying, hey, look, everybody hates the emotional experience of board meetings, but you're still telling stories. You really are telling stories, and you're trying to get other people to connect to those stories. And I don't find those two processes of building and crafting to be that different. I don't think they're that divergent. And to be honest, I don't know a lot of artists who don't want to profit from their work. There are some people who, in the worlds of film and music and art, might be the Satoshi Nakamotos of art and really actually be doing it in this almost like art brute kind of way, where they're just doing it because they have to create and they're not thinking about how it goes out into the world or what they can get back from it, from fans or whatever. And yes, there's a few people in business who have been that way, like the guy who, the mysterious figure who created Bitcoin and is sitting on all this billions and may be dead, or we don't know, you know what I mean? But whoever created Bitcoin, it wasn't backed by venture capital, that's for sure. You know what I mean? So there are these rarefied figures in all spheres who do things with, let's call it like an absence of the profit incentive. But I don't even think artists are that different from business people. They are business people. If you don't think Bob Dylan was a businessman, like, you're out of your mind. Like, he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was crafting. If you listen to the interviews with the 70-something-year-old Bob Dylan, he'll tell you absolutely how carefully and methodically he crafted the character of Bob Dylan, and how careful he was about managing the way the great songs he published made him more money sung by other people. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just like these two worlds they seem different, but they're not as different as I think culturally we make them.
Yeah, and I think that's been my great discovery as I've gotten further in my career is the craftsmanship of it, and the joy that I take, even if it fails sometimes in the process of creation. we're working on a project right now to build a performance development program for hourly employees at our portfolio companies. And we're working with this amazing learning management organization. And we're teaching things like focus and listening and how to create energy as opposed to absorbing it, and resilience and things that, sometimes people teach us through a mentor relationship, or we participate in that one-off executive program that at the top of the org chart we get the privilege of participating in, but is rarely accessible down to the people in our companies that are actually creating the value. And it's a project that might just fail completely. I had one person say, Ryan, none of these people are they're just going to click through this program you're creating. And that might be true. But my rebuttal was, but at least they know we care about them. At least they know that we see them as having possibility. And they might show up at work giving that gift to somebody else. And there might be some really cool synergy that comes out of us and this effort that we may not acknowledge today. So we'll see what happens, but it's an example of a whiteboard and an idea, and just doing it because I'd rather be guilty of creating something unique that could be helpful than just ignoring these people in our companies that are so utterly important to our futures. And so anyway, I'm kind of sort of getting off on a tangent.
No, I think, first of all, I think it's not just a kind idea or an empathetic idea. I think it's a brilliant strategic approach to getting the most out of people in a team, because every person inside their own skin has their own narrative of their path and their ambition for themselves or whatever. And again, nobody sets out like to say, I want to be a copper top for the rest of my life. They see themselves in some phase of advancement towards something, right? So like, if you're not putting some affirmation around them saying, look, you might work here now, but we don't, and we need you to do that, but we're not trying to limit you. We're not putting you in that box. Like, become a rock star, like figure out what more you can do here. Or if you have aspiration to do more, like, how are you not going to get more out of people who you communicate that way to? Of course you are. You know what I mean? So I think, and it's challenging. Like, listen, I mean, everybody knows that the bigger things get, the harder it is to sustain any sense of community. How the hell do you do it when you get into the thousands and thousands of people? It's really, really challenging, but I think the ethos under that is really smart. And I don't know, everything doesn't have to turn into the industrial scale, but it could be just for your companies. That is great. And what makes them a great place to work,
We'll be proud for it. Well, I mean, in closing, I guess I would just say, from your early days, my first exposure to you was in Primal Fear, which was such a badass performance. I don't know the right words that are going to resonate for you in your past, but I don't know how old you were at that time. I'm guessing you were in your late 20s. Is that right? Or 30s?
No, I think I was like 25 when we made it, and maybe I was 26 when it came out. I think
mid 20s. But you were just kind of making your way in the world, and having done the research for this podcast, which I try to do. I don't always do, but I didn't want to embarrass myself with you and Robert. Just looking at the portfolio of your life, you've got young children now, you've built a family, you've made an impact in the arts, and you've made an impact in the business world, and you're obviously engaged philanthropically. It's kind of like, man, if I could have wished for a life for you, having watched that film in 1996, I'm pretty sure this would have been my dream for you. It's just like having this rich life where you're touching lots of lives with your talent and your purpose and your goodness. And it's just really inspiring to me on a personal level. And I'm guessing for others. And I just want to thank you for the contributions that you're making to all of us and the energy that you're putting into your life and service to others every day. And it's just awesome, Edward. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. It's very, very beautifully expressed, and I really appreciate it. I think that there's a funny, I was friends with one of the guys who started Kickstarter because we were all in that orbit. Yancey Strickler. Have you ever interviewed Yancey?
I have not interviewed Yancey.
You should get Yancey on sometime. Yancey was the one who, when leading Kickstarter, turned it into a benefit corp and basically said, we're not going to take this public and we're not going to sell it. We're going to dividend out our investors, but we want it to be a benefit corp, and Yancey, he wrote this book in which he articulated this. He meditated a lot on the American cultural, I don't want to say obsession, but there's a strong American cultural value in the idea of maximization of everything, and certainly financial maximization. And I think it tends to, I've thought about it a lot, like even in, let's call it quote unquote, artistic careers. To me, it's ironic that in America, even in the arts, we've gotten into this thing with, awards and box office and money and everything. We're even talking about the arts in the same way we talk about business. And the more I thought about it, the more of a trap I think it is. Like, you don't get into the arts to have a 9-to-5 job. And yet it's incredible how many people in worlds I work in that are notionally supposed to be liberated from the 9-to-5 world and have turned themselves into wage slaves or turned themselves into, brands. And you sort of go, wow, is that really a victory? You know what I mean? Like, is that really, I find myself thinking a lot just about even the whole idea of career. And, do you want a career or do you want a life? Like, and I think if you project yourself forward into very old age and imagine looking backward, do you want maximized success in one sphere? Is that going to look like victory, or is diversity of experience and richness of experience and like tapestry going to feel more like victory when you're older? And to me, the more I've thought about it, the less I think I want to do the same thing, the same things, all my life. Right. So I think it's a huge privilege to get to do something you like and get to do it at a high level and do well from it. But I also think there's a lot of people I know who more and more are sometimes even more inspiring to me than my artistic heroes are people I realize I look at them and I'm like, wow, look at how many chapters that person's had. Like, and I think it's my aspirational frame changed a lot, I would say, between my 20s and 30s and my 40s now into my 50s, because you realize time's finite. And the things I've learned most are that it's fun to work with other people. I enjoy it. Working with other people versus working by yourself is more fun and more rich. Shared successes are more rich than individual successes, but also that I'm more interested in diversity of experience than sort of more success down the same path, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it most certainly does. And I really appreciate you opening up on that. I appreciate the work that you, Robert, and Jeff are doing. It's probably not the sexiest part of your portfolio. I can only imagine what the folks on the other end of the spectrum, your artistic crew, must think you're the weirdest guy ever for jumping into board meeting.
Yes, I've definitely gotten some very funny emails over this one.
What the hell are you doing, man? But it's really meaningful work. It's important work. And we couldn't be doing what we're doing at Rally Day without you. And on behalf of all of the founders who have committed themselves to building the companies of their dreams and doing it the right way with Zeck, we just want to say thanks, and thank you very much for taking time to talk to us today.
Not at all. I really, it's a very thoughtful conversation. Really appreciate it.
Have a great day, Edward.
You too.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.